Today's scripture has two parts: Jesus and the disciples traveling and teaching and healing, and a very important note of women who funded this ministry. And then the following part is Jesus teaching a parable. Is there a link between the generosity of these women and the parable that is told? It is the parable of the sower, which one author calls the watershed of all parables. In this curious parable, we often get very focused on the soil rather than on the sower. Today, let's keep our eyes on that one as he goes about his task. This from the Gospel of Luke in the 8th chapter. Soon afterwards, as he went on through cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God, the 12 were with him, as well as some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities: Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward Chuza, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their resources. When a great crowd gathered, people from town after town came to him, and Jesus said in parable, "A sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some of it fell on the path and was trampled on, and birds of every kind from the air ate it up. Some fell on rock, and as it grew up, it withered for lack of moisture. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up with it and choked it. Some fell on good soil, and when it grew, it produced 100-fold. As he said this, he called out, 'Let anyone with ears listen.'" Here ends our scripture reading. May God bless it to our understanding. Last week, I preached my wheelhouse. This week, I preach as much for self-persuasion as I do to exhort you. Today's sermon is the last in our series of hard things. We can be generous is today's topic. We can be generous, and I'm still learning. Generosity is at the heart of the gospel. Jesus' generosity in healing, in offering grace and forgiveness, God's generosity in creation and the abundance of this world, the biblical exhortations to share and to give and to love. Today's scripture passage is typical. Keeping our eye on the sower, what we observe is that she offers handful after handful of seed, tossing them out as she moves among the world. This farmer broadcasts. She is free-handed, indiscriminate, and generous, sowing on the path, sowing among rocky soil, even sowing among the weeds. This is true generosity, and it is an echo of God's generosity in the world. God is willing to be wasteful for the sake of growing the gospel. And here's the thing. We humans are always looking at things from the perspective of scarcity or the zero-sum game. We would rather not waste the seed. In God's realm, however, there is always, always, always ample. And God is willing to have some loss for the sake of any gain that is good. The sower's open-handedness has implication for us, for treasure, time, and temple. First, with regard to treasure. I begin by thanking you all for your generosity and support of this church. I am truly appreciative, and the work of this church continues because of you. And there is truly good news to share because our pledges are now above budget for the year. Now, we still have a sizable deficit, but even so, your giving puts us in a place of hope for the future. and the difficult biblical truth that most of us could do more. You know Zacchaeus, who gives away half his wealth in response to Jesus' message, or the rich young man whom Jesus implores to give away all of his wealth and follow. I am discomforted as you by those passages. I have not followed either of those examples, but those stories constantly nag at me and goad me towards greater generosity. And I talk about money generosity not because the church needs more money, though certainly there are remarkable things that we could do if we had more. I say this because we need to give. Now, this sermon series is about doing hard things, loving, living with complexity, having difficult conversations, and being more bravely generous. But we need to give, so much so that psychological studies show that we are happier when we give away money than when we spend it on ourselves, and that happiness endures longer when we give money away. We can be generous. We need to be generous. There is also a generosity of time. The church and community organizations need more people for leadership, to offer caring, to pray, to comfort, to cook meals, to build things, and so forth. And while we may be more squeamish about talking about money generosity, we may actually find time generosity far more challenging and impactful. Now, I know we are all busy, and time feels so crunched for us. But actual time use surveys show that we are not quite as busy as we feel ourselves to be. What we are doing is availing ourselves of time-consuming, individualized, home-based entertainment. Americans on average now watch 8 hours of such entertainment to every 10 hours of work, and that number has increased. Interestingly, this is precisely what the famous Robert Putnam study, documented in his book Bowling Alone, predicted. That book noted that TV watching was the single most consistent predictor of decline in social participation. And while we choose more time-consuming, individualized, home-based entertainment, our levels of depression and ill health are increasing. Conversely, social connections fostered through social, civic engagement are correlated with longevity, health, and well-being. In this strange, vicious cycle, we feel busy because we have isolated ourselves with time-eating entertainment. And at the same time, we have become less capable of offering our time generously to the development of social capital, to fostering deeply connected, richly happy relationships and communities. We need to give time to others, to the community and to the church, not because the church needs it, but because we need it. Finally, the temple. The church needs to be more generous. What I mean here is that we as an institution need to preference those who are outside, non-members, new seekers, those out in the community. We are not our best as a church if we only seek to comfort ourselves and meet our own interests and preferences. We are called not to plant our seed only in our little church plot, but rather to cast it broadly, to be lavish and open-handed, even self-sacrificially generous. We may have to learn to tolerate more discomfort ourselves, to become what the next generation needs in its church, to grow nourishing food for the future. And if we think of this as a kind of generosity, temple generosity, perhaps it will be easier for us to offer it. Generosity of treasure, time, and of temple. It is a sowing, a broad casting, a lavish offering. It is sending out seed that God might take root and others might be nourished. And the beauty here is that this generosity is demonstrably better for us as well. We are called to give, and we can give more, and it's good for us. So let us take up new levels of generosity with joy. God's realm is fully potential in each and every one of the little seeds, every single one of them. And our task is not to judge the soil in advance, but simply to scatter and broadcast, to let the seeds fall as they may, all around Dock Square and up Route 9 and along the residential streets and the main streets. Our job is to take the seeds to our workplaces and cast them there among our neighborhoods and down to the parts of town we rarely visit and cast them there as well. We are to take the seeds and spread them wherever we go. We are to toss them over walls and barriers and into the winds and over to the far plains. And God, as Scripture will say elsewhere, God will cause the growth. Yes, we can do hard things. We can be more generous. We can dare ourselves to give more of our treasure, our time, and our temple. We need to, and we are called to, and we can do.